John Gotti, Salvatore Ruggiero, John and Charles Carneglia. Just a handful of mobsters who were associated with the Gambino crime family crew based out of the infamous Bergin Hunt and Fish Social Club in Queens. But which one did John Gotti hate? Let's check it out. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at a selection of mobsters who were closely associated with future Gambino crime family boss John Gotti. Former Colombo crime family associate turned government witness Sal Polisi testified in court against Gambino family boss John Gotti in the mid-1980s. Polisi is alleged to have been close with the greatly feared Colombo crime family soldier Dominick Cataldo. After an arrest for narcotics in the early 1980s, Sal Polisi would become a government witness. In terms of government witnesses, Sal Polisi is a controversial figure who has stated that he knew many members of the Gambino family's Bergin crew, which at the time was captained by Carmine Charlie Wagons Fatico, and in the early 1970s included a young mob associate by the name of John Gotti. I chatted with Sal Polisi and asked him his opinion on several mobsters associated with Carmine Fatico's crew, a crew which John Gotti would later become acting captain of in the late 1970s. Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson was a long-time associate of the Fatico Gotti crew. He would eventually become an active informant for the authorities. I asked Sal Polisi what were his thoughts regarding Willie Boy Johnson.
He was the character. Let me tell you, people thought he was dumb. You know, they made fun of him being a half Indian. But I got pretty close to him. And towards, maybe the end of my time in New York, I left New York City in 82. Maybe in the late 70s, he gave me some samples of heroin because we had a mutual friend who was dealing heroin. And I said, hey, Willie boy, how many times did you step on this stuff? He said, go check it out. He gave me 2 samples. One of the samples he gave me was a 50% heroin, the other was cut. And when he gave me the second sample, I brought it back to him. This is the real deal. It's around 97, 98%. So he knew I had a chemist. And occasionally he'd give me a sample. I didn't want anything from him. We were just like friends. I had no clue that he was working undercover for the feds. But even to add to that, not only did he work undercover for the feds, but he actually went undercover for the state of New York in Queens County and passed my name along to one of the investigators. And for years, he was working both sides. Nobody knew that. So they might have thought he was dumb. But to do that, he had to be pretty sharp.
Willie Boy Johnson's role as an informant was disclosed during a trial that involved not only himself, but also John Gotti, John Carneglia, Anthony Tony Rotrampino, Leonard Di Maria, and Nicholas Carrazzo. Despite being outed as an informant, Willie Boy Johnson refused to testify against his fellow defendants, and all 7 mobsters were acquitted of their racketeering charges. During the trial, when John Gotti learnt of Johnson's status as an informant, he told Willie Boy that he would be safe and that no harm would come to him if he didn't testify. As Sal Polisi discusses,
so Gotti said to him, look, you did a terrible thing. This was during the first trial where I testified. And this is the way the jailers reported it. The marshals reported this scene. He said, look, as long as you don't testify against me, Gotti told him, you'll be safe. I'll never hurt you or your family. And then Willie Boy, bit the hokey doke and he believed Gotti. Of course, Gotti conned him. And that was the scene in prison. The guy, he was at the table with the rest of them while I was testifying in that trial.
In August 1988, Willie Boy Johnson was gunned down by mobsters associated with the Bonanno crime family. They were Vincent Kojak Giattino and allegedly Thomas Tommy Karate Patera. Although only Kojak Giattino was convicted of this murder. Tommy Patera was acquitted. I asked Sal Polisi why he thought Willie Boy Johnson didn't leave New York after his acquittal at the trial and after his status as an informant was disclosed. Why did Willie Boy believe John Gotti that he wouldn't be harmed?
He idolized John Gotti. He idolized John. A lot of people idolize the guy, okay? Even Angelo was taken up with Gotti, and Angelo turned out to be a slithering scumbag anyway. He had a guy killed for no reason. The only reason he had him killed is because he owed him $200,000. He convinced Sammy Gravano to kill this guy DB. I mean, everybody turned into vicious killers, and it wasn't about power. It was about money, mostly about money.
Salvatore Ruggiero was the brother of future Gambino family soldier and captain Angelo Quack Quack Ruggiero. Sal Ruggiero was an associate of the Fatico Gotti crew, and he was a big earner. Ruggiero was a large narcotics trafficker who allegedly was supplied by Bonanno family mobster Gerlando George from Canada Shasha. In around 1976, the authorities were closing in on Sal Ruggiero, and he went on the run. But he still continued to operate his large narcotics trafficking business. Sal Ruggiero would die in 1982, when the private jet he was a passenger in crashed into the water off the coast of Georgia. Both Sal Ruggiero and his wife Stephanie were killed. I asked Sal Polisi what he knew of Sal Ruggiero.
I met him a few times. All I knew is that before he was into drugs, he was a known specialist in stolen cars. He was good at it. He was smart. John Gotti hated him. He always made a lot of money. He made much more money than John Gotti and Angelo. And he was an independent. He didn't need them. I didn't know him that well, but I did have a friend that was friends with him. A guy named Mark Ryder. Yeah. Mark Ryder was a good friend of mine. We used to go to dinner together with the wives. And his son was the same age as my son. And I coached him in youth football. And Mark Ryder was a big, huge guy. And Greg was a good player. We were friends, like I said. Eventually, Greg Ryder got natural life. He's in there for life. So, but Greg was friends with Sally Ruggiero, and he used to tell me all about him. I didn't really take any drugs from Greg. I had my own connection. My problem was I was dealing drugs with Cataldo, who was a made guy from the Colombos. And in the 70s and 80s, you couldn't admit that you were a drug dealer. Everybody thinks that the mob would have killed you because you were a drug dealer. What they failed to realize was the bosses, they didn't want any competition. So they kept the underlings away from dealing drugs so they could deal drugs from the top. People didn't understand that.
John and Charles Carneglia are both made men in the Gambino crime family. John Carneglia was inducted in the late 1970s at the age of 35. According to the excellent website LCN Bios, John Carneglia was sponsored into the life by Angelo Ruggiero. John Carneglia was famously part of the hit team that killed Gambino family boss Paul Castellano in December 1985, with Carneglia allegedly the man who put the fatal shots into Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse. Carneglia would eventually serve nearly 3 decades in prison for narcotics trafficking. He was released from prison in 2018. Charles Carneglia was inducted into the Gambino family much later than his brother John, with some sources stating it was around 1990. The Carneglia brothers ran a junkyard on Fountain Avenue in East New York, and it is alleged that several bodies from mob hits were disposed of here. Like his brother John, Charles Carneglia was also a killer, and in 2009 was sentenced to life in prison for multiple murders amongst other charges. Some believe that Charles Carneglia was involved in the murder of John Favara, the man that killed John Gotti's son Frank in a car accident. Polisi would tell me what he remembered about the Carneglia brothers.
Yeah, I did. I did know John. John was a good guy. I was friends with him. I sold him a lot of cars. I was in the stolen car business. He is a classy guy with character. Now, much to everybody else's surprise, Charles was a sicko. Charles was an absolute sicko. I did do a little business with Charles. One time I needed a special key for a car, and I took Charles the lock, and he made me the key. And I managed to rip off a couple of $100,000 in jewelry without even seeing the man who had the jewelry. I slipped into the trunk and got the jewelry. So Charles was pretty expertise at cars. Now, some of the things he did that I had found out about was he tortured women. We happened to hang out at the same restaurant diner in Queens. And I knew one of the girls that worked there, and she had told me he was torturing women, burning women with cigarettes. I mean, I did take some weed off Charles. I didn't like dealing with marijuana, but I had a brother-in-law who liked it. So I'd bring him a car with a big trunk, and Charles would fill up the trunk with marijuana. I'd give it to my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law would give me the money. I'd pay Charles, and then go back and get another load of marijuana. It was too big for me in volume. Like 70 pounds of marijuana might have been a couple $1,000. A little bag of heroin was $250,000. So I like dealing with the drug of choice, which was like gold. Heroin's like gold. And I did know Charles well. I didn't know he was killing people the way he was doing. But they had an operation in Brooklyn, him and his brother, where I could drop a car off, and in a couple hours, it would be crushed. They would take it over to Brooklyn, in the middle of Brooklyn, and they had a huge salvage yard. They'd crush it up to a cube. So what they did with bodies and cars, I don't know. I mean, they were doing tricks over there, though.
John Gotti was inducted into the Gambino crime family in either late 1976 or early 1977, according to LCN bios. He was 30 years of age. Interestingly, John Gotti was inducted into the Gambino family before his older brother John. John Gotti was still in prison at the time due to his involvement in the murder of James McBratney. John Gotti, along with John Carneglia, who I mentioned earlier, would be sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1989 for narcotics trafficking. John Gotti served 29 years inside and was released in 2018. The current active mob status of John Carneglia and John Gotti is up for debate. Sal Polisi recalls of John Gotti.
Gene was a nice guy. I invited him to do a heist with us, and his brother John said, the guy Sal is crazy. Robots was my nickname, Crazy Sal. He's crazy. He's going to go into the airport and stick up a terminal where Swiss Air was. And he told Gene, you go with that guy, you'll get killed. So Foxy and I did go do the heist, and we got a couple of $1 million in watches, and they were like shaking their head. They couldn't believe we pulled that off. And that was a lot back there in 1973 because the watches, a lot of them were gold, but the price of gold was like $60 an ounce then. So you can imagine what they were worth.
As mentioned at the start of the video, Sal Polisi is often seen as a controversial government witness, and his credibility as a source of mob information has been questioned. I asked him what he thought about this.
Well, I was a witness for the government to do with a corrupt judge in Queens. He was corrupt forever. And I was in the program thinking I was done with the government. But what people don't realize, you sign a contract with the government when you become a witness. And it's sort of like the fine print when you get a credit card. You better read it. I didn't read what was there. I had to appear wherever they called me to appear. So one day I get a call from Diane Jackalone. I didn't know who she was. And they fly me up to a secret meeting in Michigan and say, you know what? We have a Gotti case and you're going to be the first witness. I go, why would I be the first witness? Because you're the best storyteller. You're a raconteur, she said. I go, what the hell is a raconteur? She says, you're a storyteller and you're going to set the stage for the first Gotti trial. And you're going to be the first witness. Okay, because look at the agreement you signed. And I was in the program, so I had to go. So I went. Well, when I got there, the whole city was upside down in excitement because that was the biggest case forever when Gotti's first RICO trial. So I was on the stand for 7 days and I got cross-examined by Bruce Cutler. He twisted all kinds of stuff around. I told the truth. I told the whole truth about my whole life in and around the mob. And then I was done. And of course, you know, the public thought after John Gotti was acquitted, he was acquitted on Friday the 13th, 1987. He became a media star. He became a celebrity. And, you know, Cutler bowed like he was a great attorney. Well, little did we know, 5 years later, along came Sammy Gravano, and he told the truth about that case and how they bribed the juror.
Interestingly, Sal Polisi's uncle, Anthony, was associated with the Colombo crime family and had ties with Sonny Franzese. This can be seen in the following official court documents, where Anthony Polisi is appealing his 15-year sentence for bank robbery. The court documents state, "The timing of the changeover in masterminding from Anthony Polisi to Franzese we have already definitely fixed. The quartet, dissatisfied with Anthony Polisi's management, was summoned to a meeting at the Aqueduct Motor Inn on an evening in late July 1965, at which time Franzese announced that he was taking over. And it was through a connection of his uncle Tony that Sal Polisi started working with future Colombo family soldier Dominick Cataldo." Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.